You Are Not Stuck by Becky Vollmer. How Soul-Guided Choices Transform Fear into Freedom. Book Summary and Introduction. You Are Not Stuck. How Soul-Guided Choices Transform Fear into Freedom. Book Summary. Becky Vollmer's You Are Not Stuck is a blend of straight talk, humor, and clear steps for action to help change seekers reset their priorities, drown out the naysaying voices in their heads, and make bold choices. We all feel stuck sometimes. In our jobs, our relationships, our habits, or when the life we're living simply doesn't add up to the one we want. We Feel Stuck by Becky Vollmer's You Are Not Stuck is a blend of straight talk, humor, and clear steps for action to help change seekers reset their priorities, drown out the naysaying voices in their heads, and make bold choices. We all feel stuck sometimes. In our jobs, our relationships, our habits, or when the life we're living simply doesn't add up to the one we want. We feel stuck when it seems like we don't have options, or when we don't trust or allow ourselves to make the changes we so deeply long to make. Speaker and yoga teacher Becky Vollmer believes that, when we feel paralyzed by our fears, the answer isn't just courage, it's choice. Because we all have choices, we just have to be brave enough to make them. You Are Not Stuck is the key to breaking the cycle of fear and making bold choices for real change. Sometimes this transformation looks like an audacious Thelma and Louise-style leap. More often, though, it is a series of small, deliberate actions based on personal values that yield more clarity, alignment, and, ultimately, long-term contentment than driving off a cliff. If what you seek is a tried and true process of empowerment that unlocks the true north already inside you, look no further. This book is a unique blend of permission and spirituality that will help you excavate your divine inner badass, close the gap between intention and action, and develop a strategic path forward that's as unique as your thumbprint. Through warm and straightforward wisdom, a modern and approachable take on ancient yoga philosophy, a series of practical and insightful grounding exercises, and a healthy dose of laugh-out-loud humor, you'll learn how to make soul-guided choices in support of the life you've desired all along. Book Introduction. On an exceptionally bright and warm January morning in 2013, a friend and I walked the beach at San Francisco's Crissy Field toward the Golden Gate Bridge. It was abuzz with walkers and runners, dogs with their frisbees and their people. I suspected most visitors would pause to soak up the sunshine and bountiful view, but all I could do was wonder, with more than a hint of scorn, it's Friday. Why aren't all these people at work? For me, it was the start of a long-anticipated girls' weekend, with Napa Valley wine tastings and a Calistoga mud bath in our future. Yet there I was, my St. Louis feet in California sand, spending what should have been quality vacation time pissing and moaning, once again, about my job. My specific lament. The never-ending, emotionally draining push-pull between work and family. Maybe I could reduce my schedule even more? I speculated to my friend Chelsea as we strolled. Or work exclusively for one client. Or move to human resources. Or something? But every idea was a square peg in a round hole, and I knew it. Sometimes bad can't be made better. At that moment, I spied a family playing at the water's edge. A man threw a ball with his young son, who I guessed was almost the same age as my younger daughter, then just 3. The man scooped up the giggling boy, tossed him high against the sun, and hugged him in close. I immediately felt a pang from having missed too many of those moments with my girls. That's what I want. Not this, that. I stopped walking and sobbed. Listen, Chelsea said firmly. If you're that unhappy doing what you're doing, then do something different. And if that doesn't work out, do something different again. You're smart, you're marketable. You'll figure it out. I swear my jaw hit the ground so hard that sand stuck in my teeth. I was a nearly 40-year-old mother of 2 who counseled C-suite executives at Fortune 500 companies, and I truly hadn't realized that choosing another path was an option. Was she suggesting I could walk away from something I didn't like, even though I'd spent more than a decade cultivating it? Did she just give me permission to quit? Permission to quit, to change, to live in alignment with priorities that had evolved as I had evolved, to redefine what success looked like for me. That was the permission she gave me, all right. And from the moment just 4 days later when I sat down in my boss's office and resigned, it has been my mission to give that permission to everyone else. Because we all have choices, we just have to be brave enough to make them. The backstory. For almost a dozen years, I'd toiled at one of the world's top public relations agencies, grinding my way from an entry-level account executive to a partner-track senior vice president leading a multi-million-dollar global practice. I was good, and I was going places. Yet I was fried. I could barely string 2 sentences together. My polished persona was nothing but a veneer. Other people liked me and my work. But I didn't like the person I had become. I tried to blame work-life balance, or the lack of it. Before children, I was a workhorse, an Energizer bunny, a machine. I did not stop. When I ate lunch, I usually did so at my desk while continuing to work, what my friend Hannah likes to call dining al desco. In my earliest years at the agency, I was among the first in the office, often arriving before the sun, and among the last to go home after the sky had turned dark again. I always felt a lonely pang when someone from the late-night cleaning crew knocked on my door and took the day's trash. Once, when I was still pretty junior, I told my supervisor I needed to work from home the next day to wait for the cable guy. There wasn't anything that resembled working from home, back then, at least not at that agency. "You'll have to take a vacation day," he said. "But I'm not going on vacation," I said. "I have tons of work to do. I just need to do it from home while I wait for the guy to show up." "You'll have to take a vacation day," he repeated. What utter bullshit, I thought. Without fail, I work far more than the mandatory minimum of 50 hours a week and don't complain when the clock starts over at 0 on Monday morning. I'm available to you 24/7. Where's the give and take? Things got trickier after I became a parent. I had been at the agency for about 6 years when my husband Dave and I decided to go for it. Funny thing was, I'd never planned on being a mom. In fact, for as long as I could remember, I was adamant that I did not want to have children. They're loud, they're expensive, and there's nothing I want to teach anyone, I thought. Throughout my 20s, my mother encouraged me to at least keep the door open to the idea. "You never know when you might change your mind," she said. And she was right. I arrived at my early 30s, looked around at my friends with kids who didn't seem completely miserable, and decided to try. The run-up to motherhood had been difficult. My first pregnancy, at age 33, was a complicated one due to what's called an incompetent cervix. I really can't think of a worse way to get a cervix to cooperate than by calling it incompetent, can you? That meant 2 key things. First, I had to get a pessary, which is kind of like an inflatable rubber donut that gets inserted through the vagina and past the cervix to sit at the base of the uterus so that baby won't, essentially, fall out. And each Tuesday for roughly 6 months, Dave would haul me to the doctor's office to have that lovely little pessary taken out, sterilized, and put back in. I'll spare you the details, but let me just say that having someone screw around with your very sensitive cervix on a weekly basis isn't exactly how one hopes to spend a pregnancy. I maintain that self-medicating with harvest grain and nut pancakes from IHOP after every visit was an entirely appropriate response. The second thing this meant was that, at all times outside of Pessary Tuesday, I was confined to bedrest. The doctor limited trips up and down the steps to once a day, a restriction that would have been more manageable had our lone bathroom not been situated on the 2nd floor, so I spent most of my time in my bedroom. On the rare days that I'd move the party to the 1st floor, I peed in a medical commode my husband lovingly placed in the dining room. This went on for 3 months, also not the way one hopes to spend a pregnancy. I did work from home for a while, but only because the doctor insisted, and then shifted to long-term disability status until the baby came. Waiting for my daughter to arrive wasn't the only thing that marked this period with uncertainty and concern. My dad, Leo, whom I loved so dearly, was dying of colon cancer. It was a slow and painful and tragic time. He spent nearly 2 long years in hospice care. He'd rally, then decline, so they kept extending his services. As my belly grew, he grew sicker and sicker. So, weekly, I broke the bedrest rules to sit on his couch while he took a codeine dose in his red recliner. As we neared my due date, I was convinced I'd be giving birth in one hospital while he died in another. But, somehow, he hung on and managed to pull his finest yellow cashmere sweater over his skeleton body for the 2 a.m. visit to the hospital while I was in labor with Josie. "There's an elderly man in a wheelchair in the waiting room," the nurse said. "Is it your grandfather?" 8 weeks later, my brother and I carried our dad to his bed for his final breaths. I put on his favorite recording of Ave Maria, a gripping Dixieland version by the Jim Cullum Jazz Band, the one I'd play again a few days later at his wake, and held his hand as I whispered a release. "It's okay. You can let go. You've done good. I'm going to take a beat here and place my hand over my heart, close my eyes, and breathe deep. And if your story includes a chapter like this, I suspect you may need a pause, too. Take it. Breathe with me. Honor your loved one. Honor your sadness. It's got to have a place to go, and I highly recommend out over down. Out allows it to pass through you, to keep your emotional and energetic channels open and alive. Down makes you feel heavy and stagnant and stuck." 2 weeks before my dad died, and just 7 weeks into this massively confusing life with a newborn, full of sleeplessness and wonder and all the postpartum emotions, I got a call from my boss at the PR agency. "We need you to come back," he said. "What's going on?" I asked, surprised. I had arranged to take the full 12 weeks of unpaid maternity leave afforded by federal law, and this was just past the midway point. "Client in crisis? Nothing out of the ordinary," he said. "It's just time." All these years later, I am as floored now as I was in that moment by the audacity of those 3 words. It's just time, and in my heart, there was a shift. I saw my work relationship for exactly what it was. I was a commodity, a revenue generator. I may have sucked it up and returned to the office, just a week after my father died, but I certainly didn't go happily. In addition to all the confusion and grief and sleeplessness I carried with me, now I carried resentment, too. Even so, I didn't yet have the confidence or clarity required to leave, and I stayed for 5 more exhausting years. When baby Josie was 6 months old, I requested to go part-time. This was a big, hairy deal at the firm back then. Only a couple other women had done it previously. My part-time schedule looked like this: 4 10-hour days in the office, Monday through Thursday, with Fridays technically off, with the caveat that I would need to be available to clients and colleagues as they needed, and that my absence would be invisible both inside and outside the company. Feeling choiceless, I agreed, and took a 20% pay cut for the privilege. And those off days were exactly what you'd expect from a firm where the unofficial motto was, "We don't take vacations so our clients can." Things only got crazier when our second child, Julia, was born 2 years later. Too often through my daughter's infant and toddler years, I was the first parent to drop off at our YMCA's childcare center and the last one to pick them up in the evening. In the short winter months, this meant going to daycare in the dark and going home in the dark, too. Knowing they'd charge $1 a minute if I showed up after the 6 p.m. pickup deadline motivated me to hustle out of the actual office, but I was most certainly still working as we drove home. Shushing my little ones, who just needed their mama after their own long day, so I could reassure testy clients. How completely backwards. Then, once home, I wasn't actually there, either, firing up the laptop and yakking on ye old flip phone. Thank God my husband had a less demanding schedule at the time and liked to cook, because kids can't eat conference calls. After dinner, like so many working parents, I'd rush distracted through the bath, book, bed routine only to get back on the computer for a couple more hours. I wish I could slow down the playback of those memories and catch a glimpse of myself in love with the moment, with the simple joy of gently leaning my daughter's head back under the faucet to rinse the sudsy no more tears from her curly blonde mop. Sadly, that's not what I see when I replay that old tape. Instead, I see a harried, scattered, impatient, resentful woman who was unhappy at work and unhappy at home, because the demands of both at the same time made each one unenjoyable. The thrill of ambitious overachieving turned into the heavy weight of overwhelming responsibility, and alcohol was the only way I knew how to turn off the chaos in my brain. I'd always been a drinker, in the same way that I had always been sassy or funny. It was simply part of my identity, the way I moved through the world. My first drink and my first drunk came at the same time, at age 12, the night of my mom's 40th birthday party. While the adults celebrated, a school friend and I had our own party with a box of Franzia and a pan of brownies, a most unfortunate pairing, I must say. I remember vividly crawling up the basement steps to the first floor, then up another flight to the bathroom where the porcelain throne and I first became acquainted. The next morning, a Sunday, I got my first taste of deadlines despite hangovers, powering through to finish a social studies paper on the Oregon Trail. Per usual, I got an A. Alcohol was no stranger in my childhood home. My dad drank Budweiser for breakfast and Chivas at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know what he had for lunch, but I'm fairly certain it wasn't food. Drinking for him, and, later, for me, was as natural as breathing. After my parents split when I was 14, I stayed with my dad. I became his drinking buddy, and he became mine. In my high school years, it was Southern Comfort and grape juice before school and a long neck bud after. I can see only in retrospect, as the parent of a daughter that age, what a jarring, juxtaposed image I presented, a child clad in the red plaid skirt of her Catholic school uniform, with a beer bottle in one hand and a Marlboro in the other. Through high school and college, I drank far more than my peers, and was a daily drinker by my early 20s. Talking with a friend on the phone one evening after work, I mentioned that I was watching TV and had just poured a glass of wine. "You're not drinking alone, are you?" she asked worriedly. "Of course not," I said. "The cats are here." By then I'd graduated to wine from a bottle, not a box. With every raise at work, my tastes and purchases leveled up a notch. I got into wine spectator ratings and studied the differences between a Napa Valley Cab and a Paso Robles Zinfandel. When my husband and I traveled to the Bahamas for our week-long honeymoon, we packed 3 suitcases. One for him, one for me, and one that contained 15 carefully wrapped bottles of wine. We drank every last one. It never occurred to me that this was unusual behavior. By my 30s, that bottle-a-night habit wasn't reserved just for vacations or weekends. It became the necessary salve simply for living. I was a woman with 2 adorable children, a marriage that seemed rock solid, a 6-figure salary, and a kick-ass shoe collection. And here I was, drinking myself into oblivion, just like my dad used to. I did stupid things too, just like he did, although my antics didn't involve regularly brandishing a weapon. Though I do remember a particularly drunken holiday party soon after coming back to work from maternity leave, during which I pulled a milk full breast out of my dress and squirted a male colleague across the bar. Talk about an assault. Facepalm. While that one drew snickers, and still does to this day, not all the shenanigans were so harmless. I acted in ways that were inappropriate, illegal, and unsafe. I said horrible things to people. I was not to be trusted. I can admit these things and tell those stories now without shame. Hell, I can even laugh at many of them. At the time, however, the staggering amount of anguish, embarrassment, remorse, and self-loathing that I carried obscured any light I could see in myself. No one was more disgusted by my behavior than me. Still, I couldn't stop, couldn't step back. So, I'd wake in the morning with a pounding head, pull myself together for another day at the office, and wrestle with the question that followed me around like Pigpen's stink cloud. Who am I going to disappoint today? You can see that the problem, of course, wasn't actually the job. The problem was that I was living a life that looked good on the outside but felt horrible on the inside. The problem was that I was on autopilot, stuck in outdated priorities that weren't mine. The problem was that I ignored my own needs and desires, and instead set unrealistic expectations, projected my perfectionism onto other people, and offered very little in terms of patience or forgiveness. I wanted freedom but felt like I was in prison. The tension in my life always built but never released. As a result, I became a pressure cooker. On the side of all the work and all the drinking, I was a devoted student of yoga who should have known better. I was such a devoted student, in fact, that I trained on nights and weekends to become a teacher, too. You might think that yoga's influence would have led me to listen more closely to my soul, and it did, but not right away. Until then, the best I could do was commiserate with friends until it became clear that my dissatisfaction was not unique. On the contrary, it was nearly universal. It seemed everyone secretly longed for a different way of living, whether that meant a different profession or a different relationship, even just a different way of relating to the world, but few were bold enough to chase it down. Those who did earned a standing ovation, while the rest of us just sat back and wondered whether we'd ever have the guts to shake up our existence. Come on, it isn't that bad, or is it? In the early 1960s, marine biologist Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring that sparked an entire generation of environmentalists to action. Her topic was the damage to society caused by the slow consumption of pesticides, but I think her questions can apply equally to those in a state of stuckness today. Why should we tolerate a diet of weak poisons, a home in insipid surroundings, a circle of acquaintances who are not quite our enemies, the noise of motors with just enough relief to prevent insanity? Carson wrote, "Who would want to live in a world which is just not quite fatal? One not quite fatal. Zing. That's a space I lived in for years, thinking it was acceptable, somehow, because I knew it could have been worse, because other people had it worse. And who was I to want better when life wasn't great but it wasn't quite killing me, either? Then I realized, when you're not quite dead, you're not quite alive, either." I wrote this book to help anyone who feels trapped or choiceless become empowered to go after the life they most deeply desire. But what if you don't know what that life looks like? What if the life you have is perfectly fine, thank you, and yet something is missing? What if you feel like a greedy scumbag for wanting more? What if you desperately want change but can't bear the idea of rocking the boat, or hurting someone's feelings, or leaving someone behind? What if you feel like your discomfort, in comparison to so many others' truly dire situations, isn't really that bad? And you ought to just suck it up and be grateful for what you've got? What if you don't have the money or the time or the education or the support you need to chase your dreams? What if you're just barely keeping your head above water? What if you're scared to death of being ridiculed for even trying? What if you stick your neck out only to have it broken? What if the voice in your head, or voices outside of you, scream, repeatedly, that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not special enough to have anything different, that, in fact, you're so utterly worthless that you barely deserve what you have now? Or what if you're just so damn numb, exhausted, dominated by pain, or lost in a hole so deep that you kind of want to give up? First of all, let me assure you that you are not alone. Not by a long shot. There are millions of people out there just like you, just like me, who crave a life that's somehow at odds with the one they are currently living. There are millions of us seeking an existence built on meaning, fulfillment, and freedom. Even better, there are millions of people out there who have found that freedom and fulfillment. Created it. Just glance around and you'll see folks who were brave enough to make the changes they needed to build the life they longed for. Consider the ones who quit their soul-sucking jobs and found something different. The ones who used to work for the man and now work for themselves. The ones who used to numb life with booze or pills and now are clean and sober. The ones who mustered up the courage to leave an unhappy relationship in order to try again. The ones who overhauled an unhealthy lifestyle. The ones who moved mountains and miles to follow the song of their heart. The ones hurting enough to ask for help. The ones willing to face their trauma head-on in order to heal body and soul. I've taught hundreds of people just like this over the years in my workshops, retreats, and online courses. They didn't arrive in their new lives by accident. Rather, they made hard and brave and necessary choices. You can, too. This book. We feel stuck when the life we're living doesn't line up with the life we want. We feel stuck when it seems like we don't have options. We feel stuck when we don't trust ourselves, or allow ourselves, to make the changes we so deeply long to make. The truth is that every thought, every action, every reaction is a choice. You can stay put or move on. Hold your tongue or speak up. Get lost in the fear that keeps you believing the myth of, I can't, or get bold enough to find your way to yes. Even when the alternatives are bad, and, worse, you still get to take your pick. We all have choices, and when we make them from a place of inner wisdom rather than fear, we create something powerful and true. The journey we'll take in this book is one of soul excavation and action planning. It is divided into 3 sections to guide you first through understanding both the general phenomenon of stuck, as well as your specific situation, then move you from fear to choice, and, finally, to taking confident action. Because, as the saying goes, nothing changes if nothing changes. This book will help you envision the life you most deeply desire, and then turn your intentions into real empowerment. If you follow the process all the way through, you'll end up with a playbook, created for you, and by you, not by some outside know-it-all, that reflects your values and priorities, your definition of success, and your individual life circumstances. Your plan of action will be as unique as your thumbprint. The process I offer you involves 9 steps. 1. Seeing the ways in which feeling stuck impacts your day-to-day life. 2. Articulating clearly, perhaps for the first time, what it is you don't want. 3. Understanding what you want instead, and why. 4. Facing squarely the fears that keep you stagnant. 5. Leveraging your divine inner badass and the other superpowers of a yoga mindset. 6. Deciding to make soul-guided choices. 7. Identifying the inevitable trade-offs, consequences, and boundaries you're likely to encounter. 8. Creating a strategic, detailed, personalized playbook to guide your next moves. 9. Integrating practices into your life that will bring ongoing care, grounding, healing, and peace for your journey. A distinctive element of this book is that it's informed by my 20 years as a student and teacher of yoga. Before you get scared and run off, let me tell you what yoga is and what yoga isn't. Yoga is not a cult. It's not a religion. And you don't have to be able to stand on your hands or put your foot behind your head or capture any fancy poses on the beach at sunset for Instagram to participate in it. All you have to do, really, is breathe and allow the practice to introduce you to a new way of viewing yourself in the world. Throughout this book I'll offer a modern take on some of the fundamental tenets of ancient yoga philosophy, such as impermanence, acceptance, and divinity, that can help you reset your priorities, drown out the naysaying voices in your head, and make bold choices in support of the life you desire. As Alexa Toronto writes in her poem, When We Get Quiet Enough. There has long been a criticism that the field of self-help and personal development sidesteps the basic tension between inherent privilege and intersectionality, and to ignore this would be ridiculous. Write what you know, they say. And, so, I'll tell you I write from the lived experience of a straight, married, white, able-bodied, college-educated woman who was raised Catholic, and later revolted against it, in the sprawled-out suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. That means I do not know firsthand what it is like to be black or brown or indigenous, or a man, or queer, or to struggle with fertility or chronic illness, or live in crushing poverty. I do not know firsthand what it's like to be discriminated against because of my ethnicity or financial status, the color of my skin or shape of my eyes, or the characteristics of the person I love. I do not know firsthand what it's truly like to not have a voice or a choice. Which means all the pain I do know may look really different than that of someone who knows, firsthand, a life that's different than mine. I say this not to disqualify either my experience or my perspective, or their usefulness to others, but to acknowledge that I know what I can ably speak to and what I might just be guessing about. I write what I know, and what I know is this: you deserve to live a life you dream of, not one you want to break free from but can't figure out how. What's more, I know you can create this life if you so choose. As you work through this book, please don't do it casually. Grab a journal and pen. Reflect deeply as you read. Scribble notes in the margins, put brackets around the sections you want to revisit, underline and asterisk and highlight until your hand falls off. Nothing short of utter defacement will make me happier.